What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. There's a moment in every authoritarian regime's life when control stops being a policy and turns into an addiction. At first it's subtle, a little pressure here, a little censorship there, a gentle please cooperate phone call to a tech company, and you know what it means. And then one day you wake up and realize the government has already built a switch, turn off, turn on, a literal switch. And that switch is designed to turn your life off whenever it becomes inconvenient for them. That's where Russia is headed right now. Not in some distant sci-fi future, not in maybe one day scenario, but that's it, it's already begun. The Kremlin is actively building a system where the internet can be throttled, filtered, or shut down entirely on demand. While a state-approved then also replacement internet keeps functioning like a digital Russian card because there should be access to it, why not? The funniest part? They're selling it as a security, as a sovereignty, as a protection. I mean, a cage is also protection if you think about it, right? Keeps you safe from the outside world while keeping you inside. So today we're going to talk about Russia plunging into digital dark ages step by step, how it started, how it accelerated, and what happens when a country that once bragged about modernity is now telling people to use cash, download offline maps, and pray that their messaging apps will still work tomorrow, unless you installed FSB-sponsored Macs. In the early 2000s, the Kremlin did not panic about the internet because it just didn't have to. Only a small portion of Russians were online. Most people still lived inside television, and television by that point was already being pulled into a tight leash. One big example, the state moving against independent TV channels like NTV, because that's, always the first move. TV, radio, newspapers. Control the screen, control the mind, win elections, repeat. But then the internet started growing. And it was not just some kind of cats and memes and that's pretty much it. No, it was information moving too fast to be edited, too fast to control. It was discussion happening outside the approved studio. It was people comparing reality to the propaganda in real time. And the Kremlin noticed. Because the Kremlin always notices the moment the population gets options. Just look at the Russian-Georgian war in 2008. Even then, online interest exploded. Suddenly, war news was getting clicked more than the Olympics. That was not just a statistics. That was a warning flare. It told the Kremlin that people are reading what they want, not what we tell them to read. And what do authoritarian systems do when they see freedom? They do not compete, they do not improve, they do not become honest. They just grab the steering wheel. So the pressure starts. So the state learns and leans into tech companies. It pushes for filtering, it demands responsibility. And when companies resist, the state finds ways to get leverage. You just saw it probably with Yandex, this Russian Google alternative basically. A company that became too important to ignore. When the state wants influence over a major information gatekeeper, it does not need to ban it immediately. It just needs a foothold. A golden share, a friendly partner on the inside, somebody preferably from the top management. Basically a decision-making person, somebody who you can influence. Because once the state gets to the algorithms, it gets to the reality. Your reality. But how would they explain limiting internet to the people? It's in just human nature to not like it when somebody takes away something from you forcefully. Well, that's when the Russian propaganda went full steam ahead. Let's talk about the justifications they told Russians why the internet must be limited in our next chapter. Then came the protests. And that is the moment the Kremlin stopped pretending that the internet was just a technology problem. It became a regime survival problem. 2011-2012 protests were a giant lesson for them. Digital freedom translates into political mobilization. People coordinated online, independent media grew online, alternative political views spread online, and then suddenly Moscow realized something terrifying. You cannot just riot efficiently if you cannot communicate. You cannot organize if you cannot share information. You cannot even form a unified anger if you cannot compare experiences. So the Kremlin did what it always does the best. It created a law with a good label, but very rotten purpose. The blacklist law, allegedly, was sold as just protecting children. Because, of course it was. That's the oldest trick in the book. We're doing it for safety, they said. And meanwhile, the real function was to create a framework to take down websites, opposition content, and anything that smelled like dissent, often without meaningful due process at all. The point was not to block just one website and another. The point was to normalize the idea that the state decides what you may see. And once you normalize that, you can expand it indefinitely. By 2019, the Kremlin went even bigger. The sovereign internet law was the crown jewel. Officially, it was about defending Russia from some imaginary Western shutdown of global infrastructure, like America needs to do it for some reason. In reality, it was about embedding state control inside the architecture of the internet itself. Not just blocking pages, but also monitoring traffic. Filtering it in real time, installing state-controlled equipment inside providers, building a system where throttling and selective disruption becomes routine, not exceptional. That is the crucial shift. Earlier censorship was reactive. Basically, this website is bad, so we block it. But 2019 model now became anticipatory. We control the pipes, therefore we control the flow of the information. That's not content moderation anymore, that's infrastructure hostage taking. That is how dark ages begin. Not with loud announcements, but with the quiet wiring and silent penetration. Sounded wrong, but you get the idea. But even all this was nothing to comparison to what came next. February 22, the invasion. That's when the Kremlin just went completely ballistic against online freedom. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. February 2022, full-scale invasion. And suddenly, the Kremlin had the perfect excuse for everything. Information warfare, basically, they said. It reframed censorship as national defense. It normalized restrictions. It told people that if you want access to the global internet, you're basically helping the enemy. Like me watching memes on Instagram helps America somehow. And once that framing is in place, the crackdown can expand without even needing to justify itself. Major platforms got blocked or restricted. Social networks, messaging apps, anything that couldn't be fully controlled, basically. VPNs also became targets, because VPNs are the embarrassing reality checks. They remind everyone that censorship is not about safety, it's about fear. But here's where it gets truly dystopian. The state did not just block. It started practicing outages, full-scale ones, mobile internet blackouts, regional shutdowns, entire cities suddenly told to live without digital tools they were forced to adopt to the point of the past decade. Then just think about it. The Kremlin spent years pushing digitization, forcing people into online government services, nudging payments into apps, moving work, school and daily life online. Everything was online. And now, it's just turning around and cutting the signal like a vengeful landlord turning off the heat. And so what happens when mobile internet disappears for hours or days? Well, people cannot pay by card. They cannot order taxis. They cannot do basic banking. They cannot coordinate emergencies, nothing. And in some regions, mobile internet is the only internet. No wired connection, no wired options, no backups, just silence. It's no longer a glitch, that is policy. And they're packaging it, believe it or not, as a security against drones. As if the only way to defend a country is to punish the entire population. Which is an interesting worldview, isn't it? I mean, the government cannot stop drones reliably, so it stops civilians from living normal instead. And while this is happening, Russia is also criminalizing the act of searching for extremist materials. Not just posting, not just organizing, just searching. I mean, you search for a wrong video on YouTube, the FSB knocks on your door. Meaning that the state is just shifting from punishing speech to punishing curiosity. That is an enormous psychological move. Because once curiosity becomes dangerous, self-censorship becomes automatic. Fear becomes the operating system. Now we get to the part that should scare everyone, even the people who still think that this is just politics. The so-called whitelist concept is basically an internet Russian plan. When shutdowns happen, certain state-approved services remain accessible. Government portals, loyal media, approved marketplaces, national apps, and over time the whitelist quietly trains citizens to accept a smaller internet as normal, as their internet. Today is just for emergencies, tomorrow it's already for stability, and next year it is for national security, they say. And one day you just wake up and realize that the global internet is the exception, not the rule. This is where Russia starts resembling models like Iran or Turkmenistan. A cheap, easy, just state-controlled domestic network, dual internet, and a filtered, unstable window into the global network that can be cut at any moment. And the Kremlin is pushing this transition with one main weapon: forced dependency. And so right here enters the maxed up, super app they call it, the dream of every authoritarian regime. Messaging plus government services plus payments plus identity verification plus documents, everything, all inside one controlled ecosystem developed by the FSB. Of course they'll never acknowledge, but well, everyone knows it. And then you just mandate it. Schools, housing services, state institutions, pre-installed on even new devices at some point, aggressively promoted by influencers who understand perfectly well that their income now depends on obedience, so they just have to promote it. Because that's also another half of a digital isolation if you think about it. You don't just block foreign platforms, you starve people financially until they switch. Just take a look at, once again, Instagram. Banning advertising does not just hurt the platform, it's not gonna much influence that much. Russia was not the major market for them anyways. But it collapses the independence of influencers. It creates a dependency where popularity becomes impossible without Kremlin-approved channels. And suddenly this content creation is not a business anymore, it's a license. You need to deserve to be posting online. And then you have YouTube as well, the big one. Massive audience, massive influence, and a huge archive of voices the Kremlin simply cannot control. If they cannot fully block it without breaking other vital services, they just throttle it. They make it slow, frustrating, constantly charging, not loading videos, unreliable. They turn daily inconvenience into behavioral conditioning. Stop using it. It doesn't work anyway. That's the narrative. This is what death by 1,000 cuts look like. Not one just dramatic blackout, but thousands of small ones that push you towards the cage voluntarily. And eventually, the goal for them is for you to say, whatever, it never works anyways, I'll just watch RuTube instead. All my favorite bloggers are there anyways, so forget about YouTube, never going there anyways. Russia is not just regulating the internet, it is building an emergency lever for regime survival. A system where if protests rise, if panic spreads, if elections get shaky, if reality becomes inconvenient, the Kremlin can squeeze the country's communication until it behaves. And here's the dark comedy. Even the bureaucracy already is starting to choke on it. Officials rely on messaging apps to manage public sentiment, coordinate work, and monitor what people are angry about. Cut the internet too hard, too much, and you don't just silence dissent. You also blind your own managers, your authorities, regional authorities. You break your own governance. You paralyze your own systems. You create the perfect environment for rumors, kitchen whispers, and uncontrolled panic. Because people will always find ways to share information. If not online, then offline. If not in posts, then in conversations. If not in channels, then in kitchens. That is how it always happens. The only thing censorship does reliably is destroy trust and accelerate decay. And if that does not sound like some kind of dark ages, well, I don't know what else does. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support our work, you can join our Patreon, and then I'll share the link to join our private Telegram group, where I'll be sending you personal video messages. The link is down below. Thanks so much for watching. Have a good weekend. See you on Tuesday. We won't succumb to their tricks. The facade